On today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, which teams are under pressure?
Dun, 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 dun.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are your team every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On today's episode of Locked On NHL, we will take a look at which Western Conference teams are under the most pressure, both to win and for other reasons. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, one half of the dynamic duo for your Western Conference Tuesday. Joining me, as always, JD Young of Locked On Sharks. And JD, as you perfectly laid out, we didn't plan it at all, but we're looking at the teams that are under pressure for this upcoming season because teams are at different parts of their process. Some of the teams that are still trying to kind of get back into the conversation, they may not be under a ton of pressure. Some of the teams, such as yours, who are continuing to cultivate young talent, they're not under pressure. And so we're going to identify the teams that are under the most pressure this upcoming season. And so let's start with you because you put a list together of some likely names. And then I've got kind of spins that I will throw for my trio. But let's just start with the first team on your list who's under the most pressure this upcoming season.
I think it has to be the Nashville Predators, right? They were super aggressive this offseason. You and I both thought they had a great offseason, but with all those moves comes now the expectations that you need to win something. This Nashville team is kind of floated along since their Stanley Cup run was at 2017, but they've added huge pieces in Stamkos. They re-signed Soros, like UC Soros. Like this team is in a win, has gone from like a fringe playoff team to a win now team with a lot of veteran players. And yes, I know they still have this team is probably going to be the same for the next couple seasons. But if you do all this and you don't win, there's gonna be a lot of questions about well, why do we do this and why do we not maybe try to rebuild and try to build this up for a more sustainable winning formula? So I think the Nashville Predators out of the Western Conference, I think they're the team with the most pressure to win because of the aggressive moves that they've made this offseason.
Yeah, Barry Trotz put all the chips in the middle of the table this offseason with Steven Stamkos, Brady Shea, Jonathan Marchessault, but with having those types of impact players added to your roster comes the expectations that you better bring it once the season gets started. And so, it's going to be fun. It's Nashville, honestly, is a city with just how it's laid out that it's good when they are good for the NHL because a party city gives you the opportunity to celebrate when the team does well. It's not going to be an easy road through the Western Conference, especially for the top flight heavyweights in the division, because as we've talked about over the last few weeks, since the season ended, even you've still got Dallas, you've still got Colorado, you've still got Winnipeg. Those three teams aren't going anywhere. The order may change, but they're still in the conversation for some of the legit contenders in the West. Another team that we'll talk about coming up in a little bit, Edmonton, they're not going anywhere. You've got the Vegas Golden Knights. They're not going anywhere. And so
Vancouver,
Vancouver,
the Pacific is the Western Conference is a very good conference, and again, like you have to jump these teams here, and I'm curious to see if this is going to be. Remember back in the day, the Eagles' dream team, they signed a bunch of guys. They thought this was going to be the Super Bowl window, and it just kind of fell apart. As we both think that Nashville had a great offseason, but there's a world where like Steven Stamkos, gets old really quickly. And some of these contracts don't turn out great, and Nashville's kind of holding the bag, having to pay guys that are old for a long time. So I still think Nashville's going to work out for Nashville. I think they're going to be in it till the end. But yeah, there's a lot of pressure for this to go right for them quickly, because like 3 years from now, when Stamkos is 37 and, some of these guys are entering their mid 30s, like the chances to win are going to be less and less likely.
Yes. And so I'm going to spin off of that with a team that I put under pressure for a little bit of a different reason. I'm going with the Colorado Avalanche, but here is the route that I am taking with that is we have seen over the last few years, obviously the Avalanche have done a great job of locking in a really, really good core with Nathan McKinnon, with Cale Makar. You've got the likes of Mikko Rantanen. You've added Casey Middlestat to that mix. So they have done a good job of being able to accumulate talent around those core guys. But here's the problem. Mikko Rantanen is an unrestricted free agent next season. Mm-hmm. And that is going to likely give you another guy that can look for double digits from a salary perspective. And the more of those guys you have on your roster, which at this point, you've got Nathan McKinnon at $12.6 million. You've got Gabriel Landeskog, depending on where he's at in his process. That's another $7 million. Valeri Nichushkin, depending on if or when he is able to come back, that's $6.1 million. But then on defense, you've got Cale Makar. That's $9 million. You've got Devon
way
Taves,
underpaid.
His contract, when it's due in 2027, 2028, that'll be another double-digit guy. But the problem with this is that it does not allow you to fill out the rest of your roster. Like that's the price you pay, is if you spread things out a little more even, you can't contend with those top ends. You can't get those top end guys per se. But if you have all those top end guys at the front, you pay for it on the back end. And I think the area that I'm looking at mostly from a concern perspective is your goaltending situation is going to have to be addressed after this season as well. You've got Alexander Georgiev, who is an unrestricted free agent after this year is done. You got Justus Anunen, who is a young goalie, but is he ready to step into a big role on this team? If you're not convinced Georgiev is the guy, you have to go out and get somebody else. And if you are going to keep Georgiev around long term, probably going to require a little bit of a raise from the $3.4 million he's making this upcoming season. Can you afford that? And so the pressure for the Avalanche is that they're going to have to continue to find ways to fill out this roster while also making sure to keep their talent locked in as much as they can. And so that's kind of the pressure angle that I go with them is, the more of these high AAVs they throw out is just money on the back end. You kind of have to fill as you go, budget shop, so to speak. So
you also look at this team. It's not like they're picking high in the draft. Of course, when you're playing deep playoff runs, you're usually trading away, your first round picks to try to acquire talent and that can help you with your playoff runs. And at some point, the well starts to run dry of cheap NHL talent that can actually come in and contribute. And then you're trying to go with, maybe fringe NHL players who are going to play for vet min. And like, that's, you run into this issue of, we can only pay so many players, and then who do you let go? And then now the players that you're expecting that you are paying may not be available this season. So yeah, it's going to be a pressure, especially for Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar, I think, to kind of carry the load for this team. And those guys are superstars, and they're capable of doing it, but a long season followed by a long playoff run, you wonder if they have enough gas for another cup run in them.
We will take a look at a few other teams, because obviously I'm going to talk about the team that I cover, because they are going to be under pressure for a little bit of a different reason. But we'll turn our attention, I think, next to the team that just missed out on hoisting the Stanley Cup trophy. So we'll continue our list of teams under pressure this upcoming season here on today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It worked for the Florida Panthers because it is the formula for winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we are your team every day. Going to give a shout out to Locked On Blue Jackets after the news yesterday that Dean Evison, old Dino, he has officially been announced as the head coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets. So make sure that your second listen today is Locked On Blue Jackets. Why am I telling you this? Because I had a chance to give a little intel on Dean Evison as part of a lovely squadcast with Locked On Blue Jackets. So
also, Caden Lindstrom was on the program. They had the 4th overall pick. So big week for Locked On Blue Jackets. So go
Locked
check out
On Blue Jackets is officially your second listen today. So make sure to go check it out. But continuing our chat in regards to the teams that are under pressure for I
think you have to go to Edmonton Oilers.
Yep.
Kind of like you talked about it with the paying people. Who are the 2 best players in Edmonton right now?
That's a great question. I could only assume that you're talking about Darnell Nurse and no,
Corey Perry. No.
Yeah.
Leon Draisaitl entering the final year of his contract, where he's making $8.5 million, and is expected to become one of those double-digit type of guys that you just mentioned. And then Connor McDavid has 2 years left on his contract before he's probably going to be the highest paid player in the NHL. Edmonton, who got pushed into a Game 7 last year against the Florida Panthers, kind of brings back mostly the same team here. And, they made some kind of moves here and there. But can this team, especially with the Edmonton media, navigate the pressures that are going to be under Draisaitl, as he's going to probably hear all season long? Are you going to get traded? Are you going to re-sign the contract, et cetera, et cetera? And then McDavid, who's going to be 18 months behind him of, are you going to get traded? Are you going to stay here? Are you going to re-sign a new deal? Plus trying to be the first Canadian team to win a cup since Land Before Time came out. Like, how can this team keep things together, especially after the disappointment of last year?
Yeah, that's where you have to have things like what happened last year with Zach Hyman going just insane from the goals perspective while making a nice, clean, and tidy $5.5 million. This is just how Edmonton has done it. One of my favorite moves of the offseason, how about Jeff Skinner going to Edmonton for a neat
third
and
of the price?
Yeah. $3 million. He's going to go in and slot in as probably a middle six guy. He'll play likely second line for them. And he's just going to get to go score a bunch of goals. That's all they're going to ask him to do, is just go score goals and be one of those complementary pieces that they've become so good at identifying that can really help them out. But, an interesting thing for me, for Edmonton, is what's going to happen with Evander Kane, because he's got one more year after this year, $5.125 million remaining on that deal. Edmonton, I think, could really use that money elsewhere. And they've shown the ability. I mean, they did it with Corey Perry. They've shown the ability to be able to go find veteran guys during the season. But it for Edmonton, you are running now to the end of the plank, as you laid out, with Leon Draisaitl and with Connor McDavid. And those guys are only going to accept not winning a Stanley Cup so many times, because that's the expectations with being the best players on the planet, is that they're going to compete for Stanley Cups and they're going to win Stanley Cups. And so if you don't make that happen, you could get a big look at what comes next as early as this offseason. And if things go wrong, if things go horribly wrong, maybe even sooner than that. So yeah, the pressure on Edmonton is immense this year, because it is not easy. You don't have happen what happened to Florida, where they go back-to-back years. You don't get back to the Stanley Cup, and especially again,
how many times do you see they miss the Stanley Cup, and then all of a sudden that next year it just falls apart on them, and all the good luck bounces that you got, and all the Zach Hyman goals that went in, then maybe half of them go in, or maybe there's a lot of it could go poorly here. So speaking about a team that made the Stanley Cup a couple years ago, Seth, and things kind of fell apart last year, who do you have next?
I have a team that is, we talked about this specific topic with them a few weeks ago. I'm going with the Vegas Golden Knights, because
no,
we have been talking about, just because of how they operate, that at some point you go to the well one too many times from a prospect or a pick perspective. It's where you don't have the ability to really make further moves. I mean, yes, they have, for 2025, they don't have a first-round pick.
Unprotected first-round pick, excuse me.
2026.
Not that I have vested interest in the unprotected first-round pick.
Yeah, no, I can't imagine why that would be. So they're going to get to the point where you can't really throw more assets at the roster. And then at that point, you have to take a real hard look in the mirror at, well, we need to, we're going to need to do something to kind of shake this up. And it works to a point. Like, it gets you to a certain point, but once Vegas crosses that threshold, and so for them, they're just under pressure every year. They're under pressure to continue to win every season. And as long as they do that, they'll be fine. But the moment they don't, the moment that they don't make the postseason, there's going to be a lot of questions that have to be answered about, what does this picture look like in the future? Do you make major change? Like, do you cultivate your roster with major changes? Or do you at some point finally say, we're out of chips, it's time to cash out?
Yeah, and it's like their roster is, Jack Eichel's 27, so he's in the prime of his career, but like Mark Stone's 32, Tomas Hertl's 30, William Karlsson's 31. You have Alex Pietrangelo, who's 34, signed for another, 3 seasons out, including this one. You have a lot. You just signed Noah Hannafin, who's 27, to a bajillion-year deal. This roster is kind of old, and at least all your key players are kind of old, and and we know Hertl has been unable to stay healthy. Mark Stone hasn't made it through. Every February he gets hurt and comes back just in time for the playoffs, but at some point it's got to catch up, and I've seen it before. I watched it with my team where you just run out of gas, and you have to take a serious step back. But they can't, because they don't have a first round pick till 2027. The pick that they made this year, Trevor Conley, he is not tradable because of his off the field issues. So even if they wanted to try to trade him, teams are going to view him as a kind of diminished package because of a lot of the red flags, and some teams won't even want to bring him into their prospect pool. So yeah, and they're already over the cap. I know they have the lane, or when Laner comes in, they'll have a little bit of cap room, but this team is just, they're running out of moves, and who knows, maybe they pull off something crazy. They trade like a Mark Stone or something like that to try to alleviate their cap space, and they've done crazy stuff before, and they continue to think outside the box. But again, you run out of moves at some point. So
yeah, it's the bill always comes due, and you can only really run from it for so long, which is something that another team is under pressure from for a little bit different reason that we'll talk about. To finish today's episode, we've each got one more team that we feel is under tremendous pressure this year. And we'll talk about those final 2 teams as we finish today's episode of Locked On NHL after this.
It's summertime, which of course means baseball season. And there's nothing more summer or American than going to a baseball game. And if you want to get tickets, you need to check out Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, with killer last minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. The great thing, they have the flash deals. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on a select seats of the game or event. If you're maybe a bit of a procrastinator and you don't want to know until literally the day of or right before the game starts, don't worry. Game Time has you covered. They have all-in pricing, so you can actually see exactly what you're going to pay. You don't have to get no surprises, no shocks when you go to check out. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL, LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
One final segment of today's episode of Locked On NHL for you. Once again, we are your team every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. JD, did you know that Locked On has the first of its kind 24/7 streaming channel, bringing you all of your favorite Locked On shows, all your favorite Locked On personalities, and the best part about it is that you don't have to deal with 2 people sitting across from each other at a table screaming at the top of their lungs to try to let their sports opinion be the one that is heard over their colleague. We don't do that. So
no, we don't, Seth.
Make sure to check out Locked On Sports today on YouTube or on the Amazon Fire TV channels app. Either way, you get 24/7. The best sports takes, the best Locked On shows, and it's actual conversation. So make sure to check it out. Once you're done watching today's episode, just hang out. We'll send you right to it. Locked On Sports Today. All right, let's finish with the final two teams under the most pressure this upcoming season. Who's last on your list?
I have the LA Kings, and most specifically Rob Blake of the LA Kings, but the Kings in general, where this kind of franchise went from a rebuild to quickly kind of being aggressive to make moves to get them, to start to contend. But they have been a one and done team in the playoffs for the past couple seasons. And Rob Blake there's a lot of questions about Rob Blake and kind of the direction of the Kings and kind of where they're heading, right? You get Kevin Fiala, you get sign, some of who do they sign a couple of years ago? But they've like Philip Deneau. Sorry, excuse me. You get a bunch of these guys in here to try to help you win, but you're really you kind of halfway restock the prospects. You got Quentin Byfield, who's on his way to becoming a superstar. Brant Clark, who's I think going to be a really good player as well, but it felt kind of a half measure with the way they rebuilt this, and then all of a sudden try to turn it into a contender. And you wonder if they rushed the process a little bit too much. And you look at kind of the rest of the Pacific, and while the Sharks and the Ducks are not going to contend this year, they've been much more deliberate in the way they've built their prospect pool, and they have two of the best prospect pools in the NHL. And eventually those prospects become NHL players, and you wonder how long before in your own backyard with the Ducks and the Sharks, they're passing you as an organization, and you're kind of stuck in that no man's land of you're too good to be bad, but you're not good enough to kind of contend for things. And I'm curious to see what the Kings do to try to push themselves over the hump and make a long playoff run.
Rob Blake has himself to thank for his current predicament, because for the 59th year in a row, and I say that completely jokingly because they had Jonathan Quick for a long time. For the 59th year in a row, they haven't meaningfully addressed the goalie situation. And you are now going into a make or break season with Darcy Kemper as your starting goalie, David Riddick, and Phoenix Copley. That's your goalie room in a, you got to win or you are going to be updating your Indeed profile like I have been. And so there's huge pressure on the Los Angeles Kings, because at some point you have to take a real different look at what you have going on. And, there may have been no more we are really feeling the heat move than 1 year after signing a mega extension, deciding that you didn't want anything to do with Pierre-Luc Dubois, and so sending him to Washington for Darcy Kemper.
Which I think was a good move. Tiny bit of business, as the kids say. But yeah, you still have questions in net, and I know they have some intriguing goalie prospects, but none of those guys are ready to take the reins right now. And this team it feels like it's on a different timeline than it should be on. And I wonder if Rob Blake, if he could do it again, if he's a little bit more kind of slow, deliberate, let's let some of these young guys continue to develop. Let's continue to get high-end picks and be able to contend in the Pacific for the next 10 to 15 years instead of this kind of 4 to 5 year run where they haven't been able to get out of the first round. So yeah, because
their ceiling this year, I mean they're probably hoping to get a wild card spot at this point with
the best I think they could do is third in the Pacific if everything goes right. But yeah, this team feels like a wild card team that's going to lose in the first round again, and Rob Blake is probably going to get fired.
Well, the final team that we have, I saved the one that I cover for last because the Minnesota Wild are under pressure this season as well, but it's for a little bit different reason. I mean, we are in the final year of the major cap restraints that have been put on by buying out Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. So the thought being that, well, hey, the restraints have been lifted and you finally can move both your hands. Somebody unlock the handcuffs and you can finally get up, stretch your legs, and start to make some moves. But here's the problem. Kirill Kaprizov will be going into the final year of his deal in 2025-2026. And with how this roster is currently constructed, which I've done a bunch of these shows, and you make like 2 or 3 roster moves and the lineup just looks fundamentally different in a good way.
Yeah.
But that's the thing is, if you are going to convince a guy to stick around here long term and be like the focal point of this franchise for the next 8 years, he's going to want to get a look at what is coming up next, because he's hitching his wagons to it. He's tying himself to this team through a lengthy extension by seeing what players he's going to be around for the longest amount of time. And there are good pieces on this Wild roster that will be here through a good portion of that tenure. But there are also some pieces on the roster that you look at and you say, could upgrade there. And so the Wild are under huge pressure because it's going to be tough for them to, especially again in a tough Western Conference, it's going to be tough for them to fight for a playoff spot if things go the way they did last year. Injuries, veteran players struggling to find their previous form. If you let some of the youth take over those spots and impress you, then all of a sudden, that makes Kirill, I think, a little more likely to stay, is seeing, hey, these guys can play a little bit. These guys can fill some top spots in the lineup, take a little pressure off of me and not having to be the one to do it all. And so the pressure in this season is, to just show Kirill some of what will be there with him over these next several seasons. And so it may not be pressure to win per se, but it's pressure to show him what's coming up next.
I think pressure to be competitive.
Yes.
And like they have a lot of cap space coming up, but it's like you're going to have to pay Brock Faber a hefty sum of money. And there goes like a chunk of the money you just kind of freed up. And like you mentioned, Kirill Kaprizov is going to be one of those double-digit guys, you would assume, because he's really good at hockey, last I checked. And then, and you're going to have some goaltending. I know you've got Jesper Volstad coming up, but like you're going to need to find him a running mate. Marc-Andre Fleury is a bajillion years old. Like you have decisions to make with Philip Gustafsson, who looked like he was going to be the dude. And then this happens a lot with Wild goalies where they look like they're on the precipice of being the dude, and then they take a step back. And I feel like I hit a nerve right here. It feels like this Wild team. They've been a creamy middle team, a team that's you're too good to be bad, and you're not good enough to be like competitive. And they have to. I'm curious to see if they use this season to let the children run wild, try to figure things out, and then that way you can kind of shift your core from some of your older guys to these younger guys around Kirill Kaprizov. And then that way you have and try to unload some of these bloated contracts and give yourself some flexibility here. So the Wild could look very different here in, the next 2 years, and they have a really good prospect pool. But can these guys kind of push some of these veterans out of jobs? I think without losing, I guess, like their ability to stay competitive, I think is going to be, it's a tough thing to ask.
It's a fine line, but it's an important line to make sure that you're on the right side of, because if you've ever watched one of those movies where somebody's going across the rope bridge, things can change very quickly. So we will see what happens, but these teams for sure are feeling the heat heading into the season, and we'll keep an eye on them and many more as we move through the rest of the offseason into next year as well. But that will do it for today's episode of Locked On NHL. We thank you for tuning in today and making Locked On NHL your first listen and part of your regular rotation of podcasts throughout the week. We know you've got a handful that you listen to on the regular. We thank you for making Locked On NHL one of those shows. Make sure to hit the like button if you're watching on YouTube before you head out for the day. And if you think the teams that we picked are the right choices, let us know in the comments. And make sure as well on your favorite audio platforms, leave that wonderful 5-star review. And we certainly appreciate that because that helps with the reach of the show. So thanks for tuning in today. We'll have you covered throughout the rest of the week here at Locked On NHL, but you can hear both of us next Tuesday. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Locked On NHL.